The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, Deprivation of Rights and Failed Responsibilities. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment was an awful, unjust, and irresponsible experiment that the government performed occurring from 1932 to 1972 on hundreds of black men in Alabama who had syphilis. Doctors failed to tell the men of their condition, syphilis, and when a cure came out for syphilis in 1947, the doctors also failed to provide the men with this cure. The men had a right to know that they had syphilis, and the government and doctors had a responsibility to tell them what they were doing. The government failed their responsibilities, and as a result the men were deprived of their rights. Tuskegee is a city in Macon County, Alabama, where over 95% of the population is black, and whites make up only 1.8% of the population. The Tuskegee study began as a study to document and treat syphilis in the black population. When funding was cut because of the Great Depression, the U.S. Public Health Service stopped the original study and changed it into what it became and is known for today. The Tuskegee experiment, titled the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Male Negro's purpose was to record and study the natural effects of untreated syphilis in black men. The study lasted 40 years, although it was originally only supposed to last 6 months. Altogether, there were 600 men used in this study, but only 399 of them had syphilis. The other 201 were used as controls. Syphilis is an STD which, when left untreated, can result in horrible symptoms, ultimately resulting in death. Blacks in Alabama did not have all too many options for medical care at this time. Therefore, when they heard of the opportunity to get free medical care, they jumped all over it. The majority of the men who were being experimented on were sharecroppers and had never seen a doctor before. The patients were told that they were being treated for bad blood, never that they were being treated for what they truly had. By law, doctors have an obligation to treat all of their patients to the best of their ability and with the best medicines available. They are only allowed to perform experiments on patients if they have written informed consent. Written informed consent requires that the patients be told that they are part of an experiment and that they may not be receiving the best drugs for their illness, and they agree to participating after understanding all the risks. The doctors in this study intentionally withheld from their patients the knowledge of their true condition and that they were not in fact going to be receiving proper medical treatment. The doctors breached their legal responsibilities and the patients were neglected of their rights. The men thought they were getting free medical care, thinking they were getting the appropriate medicine needed, when actually they were getting aspirin and spring tonics. The doctors would do spinal punctures, chest x-rays, physical examinations, and blood tests in monitoring the advancement of syphilis. The patients were so much as bribed with free hot meals and free rides to and from the clinic if they were to return annually for these checkups. The free hot meals and thought of free medical care with underlying deception did not make up for the horrible symptoms of syphilis that the men suffered. Symptoms of syphilis include tumors, heart disease, paralysis, blindness, insanity, and even death. In 1947, penicillin came out as a cure for syphilis, but disregarding the men's rights, the doctors failed their responsibility to give the men this easily accessible cure. In July of 1972, Peter Buxton, a former health service employee, spilled the story to the press of what was going on in the study. Both the New York Times and the Washington Star then released a story written by Jean Heller, simultaneously exposing the study on July 25th of 1972. This got hold of the public's attention, finally causing the spark for action to take place to end this horrible study. After the press release, the Assistant Secretary for Health and Scientific Affairs appointed an ad hoc advisory panel to go and review the study. The panel had 9 members, all from different fields, and found that the men had agreed to be examined and treated, but the researchers never informed the men of the study's real purpose. Because the men had been so misled, they had not been given the required facts to provide informed consent. The panel also found that the patients were never given the choice to quit the study, and for these reasons concluded that the study was ethically unjustified. In October of 1972, the panel advised for the study to be stopped immediately, and a month later, the Assistant Secretary for Health and Scientific Affairs announced the end of the study. A year later, in the summer of 1973, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of the patients. The lawsuit was concluded in 1974, and a $10 million out-of-court settlement was agreed on. The settlement also provided that the U.S. government give a lifetime of real medical benefits and burial insurance. In 1975, the benefits were extended to the wives, children, and widows of the patients, and in 1995, the benefits also established inclusion of health care. These benefits were provided by the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program and were to be administered by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Although the study was shut down and the families were provided benefits, it wasn't near enough. 28 of the men involved died of syphilis, 100 of the men died of related complications, 40 of the men's wives had been infected, and 19 of their children had been born with congenital symptoms, all because our government thought it was justified and they were in the right to use human beings as laboratory animals in a long and inefficient study of how long it takes syphilis to kill someone, as Henry Reisner, a news anchor, put it. Because the government failed their responsibility and deprived these men of their rights in treating these men as human beings, informing them of and treating them for their illness, the men involved not only suffered horrible physical outcomes, but they and their families also suffered huge emotional issues as well. The benefits that the participants and their families were given disregarded the fact of their emotional discomfort and struggle with what happened to their loved ones, a discomfort that lives on for generations. One of the patient's granddaughters, Carmen Head, who had not yet been born when the study had been shut down, said, "It's a painful issue in my family." Her mother, the patient's daughter, said, "It was something to be ashamed of, so it wasn't talked about." And, "We were really very disturbed after we found out my father was a part of it." The thought of your father being used so inhumanely in a study and the consequences he paid for the government's actions is unimaginable. The physical expenses that the patients and their loved ones faced are horrible, and the emotional ones should not be disregarded either, as they are just as unfortunate and unjust. Although the study was seen as a disgrace and a horror, a shameful time of our country, one of the doctors, John Cutler, disagreed and stood next to what he did, saying, "These individuals were contributing towards the health of the black community, rather than simply serving as guinea pigs for the study." And when talking about the deprival of the cure penicillin, he said, "It would be undesirable to go ahead and use large amounts of penicillin to treat the disease because it would interfere with the study." Although there is an extent to which scientists have the right to do experiments on humans to later benefit the health and understanding, there is a very fine line of which was crossed here when the doctors did not tell the patients of the study and ask them if they were okay with participating in it. Although John Cutler may think that what he and his colleagues did was justified, the president at the time, Bill Clinton, strongly disagreed. On May 16, 1997, he made a public apology regarding the Tuskegee syphilis experiment.
Done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
This study opened the entire nation's eyes, including the president's, and will go down in history as one of the worst experiments our government performed. It will be remembered in time and will stand out as something to look back on and make sure we progress and not regress back into these types of horrible secrets, hidings, and experiments on humans. The president's apology and the government's benefits did not make up for the horrors that the government performed on these poor men and the tragedies they faced because of it. It does not change the fact that these men were deprived of their rights, and the government failed in doing their responsibility to treat humans as humans, not as lab rats. All in all, what was done was disturbing and disgusting and violated our rights and responsibilities as U.S. citizens.